So as we look at the bottom of the cylinder head, you can see part of the old head gasket. We're going to have to go ahead and take a scraper and remove that, and be real careful that we don't leave any nicks or anything. We have to clean this surface absolutely as smooth as possible. And I'm probably going to take a little bit of sandpaper and touch up these valves. You can see all the rust. Now, in a situation like this, you could get leaky valves or maybe some heat buildup on that rust, so you want to try to clean that up. So I'm finally at the point of assembly, and I have all of my items, and in going through my bearings and checking the part numbers, making sure these were 91s and these were 80s. But we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna plastic gauge all of the bearing surfaces to make sure that the bearing clearances are within spec. Whether it's over or under, we want to make sure that the bearings are right within spec per the manual. So I'm going to go ahead and start the process, put it on time lapse, and we're going to put all the bearings in. We're going to put the crank in. We're going to go ahead and bolt the bottom cradle in. With using the old bolts, we're only going to torque it down to say 15-20 foot-pounds. We're not going to torque it all the way down to what the specs say, and then we're going to take it back off, and we're going to check all of our main bearing clearances, and then we're going to do the same with the rods. So we're going to go ahead and assemble this correctly, not just throwing it all together. Now, after we are done with the rings, or after we're done with the bearings, then we're going to take the rings out. We're going to check the bore spacing on them with a feeler gauge, and we're going to write them down, and then we're going to take each ring to the ring grinder, and we're going to make sure that all of the rings are within new build specs of what they say they're supposed to be. Typically you want 3 to 4 thousandths for every inch of bore space, and I'm going to say these are probably 2.5 to 3 inch bore, so they're probably going to be somewhere between 12 and 15 thousandths on the upper ring gap, and somewhere between 15 and 18 thousandths on the secondary ring gap. And then we'll just check over the oil rings to make sure that they're within spec as well. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it on time lapse, and we'll start the process. Alright, so we have our bearings placed in the bottom girdle here, all new. I realized earlier that I was messed up on my part numbers. I had them backwards. So they sent me 6 rod bolts, or 6 rod bearings, and then 4. They were just, the way they had them packaged was kind of opposite. They had the rods with the bottom section of bearings, and then they had the others all alone. So they kind of made it seem like it was the other way around. But I've got, you can see my plastic gauge laying on top. See if my camera will zoom in. And I'm going to go ahead and try this for the first time and lay it down. I went ahead and checked fitment, and everything seemed to fit. I didn't want to press it down because it's got the little pin right there. But in order to check it, it's kind of hard because you don't have, you know, main rod caps. If you had caps, like on an engine like this, it would be a whole lot simpler. But this makes it a little bit more difficult. But we're going to go ahead and give it a whirl. Okay, so since we're just doing a test and we're using the plastic gauge, we're not going to torque this down to the major setting. We're just going to kind of tighten it enough to where we get what we're after on our plastic gauge. So I'm going to do roughly 15 to 20 foot-pounds. Do opposing bolts, typical to the torque pattern when you would normally tighten it. I'm not a fan of these torque bolts. We have to make sure that we do not rotate the crankshaft at all while we do this. Okie doke. Now all we gotta do is take it off, take all the bolts out, take this bottom girdle off, and then we'll check with this indicator here, and it will tell us what our clearance is, and then we'll refer to the book or the manual and we'll see what it's supposed to be. So we're going to take our plastic gauge here and we're going to cut that much off of it, and this will be our indicator. And then we're going to come over here and you can kind of see the marks on the crankshaft. Now you have to be sure to wipe all this stuff off when you're done. Let's see, here's the front one, there's the second one. See if I can zoom in on that. But what it really did, it really left a nice impression over here on the bearings. So we're going to come over here to the bearing and we're going to measure it. And if you see, get on the right one. So we've got 3, we've got 2, and we've got 1.5, and we've got 1. And if we measure that, that's somewhere right around 2 thousandths of clearance. Check this one and see if we go over here to 2.5, it's not quite 2.5, but it's just a smidge over 2. You can see this little dent here. I don't really like that, but it was from shipping, and I guess another point of a bearing made contact with it. I can barely ever so feel it. We come over here and we see this one, and we're right around 2 thousandths. So let's check the book and see what the book says. So we come over here and we get these numbers, and basically you've got the mag in the center and the PTO, and it's telling you 2 thousandths of an inch, 2 thousandths of an inch, and 3 thousandths of an inch. That's pretty much practically what we're getting. The one down here towards the PTO, it kind of fell. If you see that, it kind of fell off, so it really didn't get a good test on it. And you come over here and look, and we got a little bit of an indicator right there, but we can't really use that as a legitimate guide. But if we look, it's 3 thousandths. So it's beautiful. I'm very happy that the bearings came in within spec. So now I'm going to repeat the process on the rods, and then we'll start with the rings. Now, another thing to pay attention to when you're going ahead and you're putting your pins and your pistons. Now, I labeled this my own way. I don't really know what the instructions say. But on the rod, there's this P indicator. And then while I was taking it apart, I went ahead and scribed on the piston. You can see right here, P. So basically, the P's are going to line up. So the P is going to be on this side. The arrow is facing forward towards the front of the engine. And then this P on the rod is going to face in the same direction as the P that I scribed on the side of the piston, so I know the way it was oriented. I just got to slide that in there. We're going to go ahead and we're going to take this. Now I've already got oil on it, and I've already got assembly lube. I kind of mixed the two together since the assembly lube was a little thick. And I got this in there. That's nice and neat. And then we have our P scribed on the side of the piston. If you look here, this is pointing towards me, and then the P is pointing to the left, as long as the arrow here. Now, if you take it and face the arrow away from you towards the front of the engine, then the P is going to be on the right side. But you just got to make sure that you get them correct. Now, these are a little bit more tough to install. You're going to want to keep the locked pin, or the little bent part, out. We're going to take the other piece, keeping it out of the little opening area there. Set that in the groove. Keep a little bit of pressure with your finger. Take a flathead screwdriver, and we're going to push against this. It takes quite a bit of force. Woo boy, I got it on there. Now, since we got that on there, we want to take another little screwdriver, and we want to go in this little gap here, and we want to make sure that we turn it and we seat it in. And what I like to do is take the little flathead, take the other screwdriver, and kind of tap it, and just make sure it's embedded. You don't want this C-clip coming out and riding around in the side of the cylinder walls, especially in the Jetski. So, repeat the process for the last one. Alright, we got rod number 1 in hole. We got it facing right. Put our plastic gauge in there. About to take it off and check. And then we're going to do the other 3 and check those as well. Now, when you're using plastic gauge, this right here is basically what you want to do. You want to get you a piece just long enough to go across the whole bearing surface, and then go ahead and put your cap on with your new bearing, tighten it down, and then release it, take it back off, and then we're going to measure. Now, if you notice in the video, I had this white spray paint can. It's basically the same size as the bore. And what I was using it for is kind of an elevator for the piston, to get the rod up to the right height to where I could measure it, to where I wasn't working down into the galley of it. So basically it just kind of held the piston up. That way, like, if you didn't use it, you would be in a situation where you'd be fumbling with it, moving it side to side, and your plastic gauge would fall off. So we're going to come over here and we'll look at our marks. There's mark number 1. We'll zoom in on that. So basically, we're going to take our little gauge here and we're going to measure it. So we're somewhere between 1.5 and 2 thousandths. We're pretty close to 2 thousandths. We're not quite 1.5, but that's pretty tight. That's pretty tight clearance. Now we're going to rotate it. We're going to look at the middle one here. Pretty close to 2 thousandths on it. See, we're dead nuts on it. And we're going to come up here. We're going to rotate it again. Get a little zoom in. It's hard to tell this one, but you can kind of see. But yeah, we're rocking about 2 thousandths. So what we're going to do now, we're going to check the book and see what the book says. Okay, so we come over here, and I believe we've got basically just these numbers here. So it says connecting rod, big end diameter, and big end radial play, axial play, and big and small end diameter. So I believe we're going to go to the big end diameter. Service limit, it just says that, you know, it's basically telling us what the size of the hole is, not really what the thousandths is on your bearing. I'm gonna assume service limit, because that, you know, a little over 3/1000ths of an inch. I'm gonna assume that the limit on the bearing would be 3/1000ths of an inch. And you come down here and you got these. Those are really, really tight numbers. That's a little over 1.5 thousandths. But that's the service limit, and it says big end axial play. Not really 100% sure what those odd words mean. Just some of the wordage in this book is a little bit different. But 2/1000ths on a rod on a high spinning engine like this is, in my opinion, typical. So they all pretty much match what I believe in my book should be correct, because the main journals, they pretty much mic the same, and that's what it says. Because on the other one it says it was supposed to be 2, 2, 2, and 3, and that's exactly what it was. And in comparison with how little that this engine had been ran before we decided to do the rebuild, since we cut the threads on the crankshaft, it really shouldn't have been any out of round or, you know, worn out at any point. So everything checks out. Okay, so now that we have our bearings all complete, now it's time to move on to the rings. So in each one of these packs, you get a full set of rings per piston. You're going to get your compression ring, your top ring, and you're going to get your secondary compression ring / your oil scraper, and then you're going to get your oil rings for the bottom. And they all come as a kit, and there's some instructions in there. From what I read on the manual, they say that I believe the top ring is going to have like a groove or something like that on the side of it. So they do have an up or a down. You're going to have to pay attention which way that you install them. That says, well, okay. All have the same part number. So now what we're going to do, we're going to check the ring gap, and most undoubtedly we're going to have to grind each one of these rings. So your top ring and your second ring, we're going to have to basically put them in the bore, check it with a feeler gauge. So we're going to use these, our feeler gauges, and we're going to put them in there, push them down about 3/4 of an inch from the top, keep them flush, check them with this, and then your rule of thumb is you want to be 3 to 4 thousandths for every inch of bore space. So we're going to be somewhere around 12 to 15 thousandths on a ring gap. You don't want to be any less than that, because due to high RPM and high heat, the top ring is going to be eating all that heat from the cylinder, so it will touch and then break the ring land. So you want enough of a gap to prevent it from touching itself and swelling and creating drag and creating hot spots in the cylinder, and then it eventually will break the top of the piston off, ruin the ring. And if you put too much gap in it, then you'll get blow by. So you want that nice somewhere in between. So we're going to go ahead and check them and see what they are beforehand, and then we'll go ahead and grind them if we need to. Okay, so we look inside the ring pack. This is going to be ring number 1, your top ring, your second ring, and then your third ring. Now if you notice, if I can get it zoomed in enough, let's see here, put it on a surface. If you see the letter N, alright, so if you have a ring that has a letter on it or any sort of markings, that is always going to face the upward position. We come over here to number 2, and it also has an N on it, so that's going to face the upward position. And then the oil rings, the way you install these is you go ahead and you put on your center ring here, this divider, and then you put on your bottom, and then you put on your top. You want to make sure that they're not overlapping, and you want the gaps. So you see the gap in this ring, you want this one facing this way and this one facing the opposite way. And then if we continue on, you're going to want this ring facing like so, and then you're going to want this ring facing like so. So they're all in opposing of one another. And you also want to pay attention to where the skirt of the piston is, because the piston has a slight pivot point, and you don't want any of the openings in the slight pivot point area. It's hard to understand, but you'd have to watch videos on installing these, and there's more detailed videos to explain that. I understand it, but it's hard for me to go in depth. Okay, so we went ahead and used our piston here, and we pushed the top ring down about 3/4 of an inch, and you can't see it. Oh, there you go, you can see it in the video. So you can see the gap there. So we're gonna take our feeler gauge here, and this feeler gauge is actually 8 thousandths, which it says it is the minimum service. I'm gonna go ahead and pop that right in, and it actually fits beautifully. There's no drag, so I'm gonna go ahead and up it and see what feeler gauge that I can put in here. But if we come over here and we see our piston top, see ring end gap, rectangular, so you got 1, 2, 3, so we're gonna do 1, 2, 3. And then right here, so we're roughly 8 thousandths to 14 thousandths. And it says its service limit is 47 thousandths. It's kind of big. But yeah, so we're looking somewhere between 8 thousandths and 13 thousandths, 14 thousandths. Okay, so I just got finished measuring the brand new ring, and it measured 13 thousandths. So as a reference, I went ahead and got my old piston rings, and I went ahead and checked them. So I had 13 thousandths on the old one, 15 thousandths on this one, and 14 thousandths on this one. So by checking the old ones, that's what the service limit was on, you know, or what the measurement was on used rings. So they were already ran for 65 hours, and they were still around 13 to 15 thousandths ring end gap, which is kind of perfect. So that one there is perfect out of the gate. I'm gonna go ahead and check the others and make sure that all of them are within spec before I go ahead and assemble this. Now, if any of them are out of spec, then I'll show you the process of what we need to do in order to grind them. Okay, so we're gonna check. So we need, our top needs to be somewhere between 12 and 26. The bottom needs to be between 8 and 22. And then these need to be between 4 10 thousandths and 1.5 thousandths, which is kinda really tight. Doesn't need to be like that. But basically what we're looking for over here is something like 14, and over here we're looking something close to 20. So there was only 2 rings that I had to touch. This one came in a little tight, so I went ahead and I put it on the ring grinder. I think I measured this one at like 16 or 15 or something like that. One of these I had to touch. It came in at 13, so I went ahead and just you know, buffed it a little. You kind of saw that in the time lapse. But I got all the top ring grooves set at 14 thou. And then that one set at 20, 18, and 18. And all of the oil rings were pretty good. They were all chilling around 10 thousandths. And that one right there says, you know, 16 thou. So 4 10 thousandths is really small. I wouldn't go on the small side of these. I would go towards the bigger side of these, because the service limit on your top ring is, you know, 47. So that's pretty big, you know. 26 thousandths, that's still pretty big. But for the size of the bore, it's kind of big. But they're all within spec. So we're gonna go ahead, slap them on the pistons, and we're gonna use our compressor. And I might actually use this compressor here. This right here actually fits beautifully right inside. I'm gonna have to squeeze it just a little bit, but these was for Predator motors, so the bore size is pretty much identical to the Predator motor, so that's pretty cool. So we're gonna go ahead and slap them in there and put the crank in and go from there. All right, so we've got all 3 pistons in. The arrow is facing that direction, and when I took it apart, I put a little triangle on this side, put a little triangle here, made sure I had labeled the pistons, because see, that says number 1, this says number 2, and number 3, and then I scribed number 1, scribe number 2, and I scribe number 3. The way I knew where everything went. And then I've got everything looking pretty good there. So I'm gonna go ahead and lay the block down and put the crank in it. Okay, the rotating assembly is on, and next thing I got to do is put the bottom journal across and get a torque wrench and torque all these bolts down. Take a look at the RTV that I got going on. Put on a real fine line of it. I just took this cap and drilled a hole in the tip of it as small as I could. That way I didn't have any excess. Go ahead and put a little bit more oil on the bearings, and then we're going to slap it together. Alright, we got all these M9 bolts torqued down to 15 foot-pounds, and then we went back and we turned them 120 degrees and went in a specific sequence as per the book. Then I went ahead and put Loctite on all these outers and got them all locked down. Alright, so now I'm working on putting the bottom plate on. Can't forget that we have these. Now what I went ahead and did, since your oil pump is here and your oil pump is here, I went ahead and put a few capfuls of oil in there. That way it would already lubricate the oil pump. I'm gonna go ahead now and lay it on there. Put Loctite on all my bolts. Tighten them down. Alright, so the next process is going to be installing the head and the head gasket and all of the new head bolts. So that's what we've got at the moment. We've got our timing marks over here lined up. I've got brand new head studs here, and anybody watching the video, if you're going to be doing this, I have another 8 of these M9 head studs or bottom end studs. For some reason they sent me 24 instead of 16, so I need to get rid of them. So if you want to buy them from me rather than buy them from BRP, they're still good in the pack. So I'm gonna go ahead now and throw it on time lapse and mount this head. Alright, so the head is all torqued down. I went ahead and used this copper spray gasket. I like to coat my head gaskets in that. It's just extra added protection. So what I did, I went ahead and torqued them all to 15 in the sequential pattern that the book set tells you. And then instead of doing 120 degrees all at one rotation, I did 45 degrees around, and then I did an additional 90 degrees around. That's how I got to my 120. So, you know, you're not looking for a full 180 degrees all the way around. So if you do 90 and then you do 45, you get to what the book says as 120 degrees. So I'm gonna say they're probably somewhere in the 45 to 50 foot-pound range. That's kind of where I'm guesstimating on like how it felt. I got other engines over here that have, you know, 40 foot-pounds on the rod bolts and 90 foot-pounds on the main caps, and it ain't nowhere near that, you know, near 90. So I'm gonna go ahead now and start the process of putting all my guides in, and then we're gonna set the timer. Okay, so since I have not taken off these hard to get off things here, I believe I am correct as far as lining up those lines, because they're both flat and they're both pointed towards one another. Now I'm gonna go read and make sure that that is correct. But right now I'm contemplating on this side being off one tooth, and it needs to go that way. But need to take a break here for a second and check to find out. Okay, so my questioning of the timing marks, I was basically correct. So good thing that I double checked, but I was actually correct. So basically when I tightened everything down, it went ahead and pulled this gear up slightly when I installed the timing tensioner. So it kind of made sense after I got that far into it. So I went ahead and put Loctite on all these bolts and torqued them down. I'm gonna go back over it again and put some oil on all the lobes, get everything lubricated. I went ahead and put all new of these O-rings on there. And then here are the old diamond shaped O-rings. And then these here are gonna be our new ones. Those are gonna go into place right here like so. And all these, everything came out of the gasket kit, which was there. And what I have left of the gasket kit is over here. Beautiful ski. I have this for the magneto cover, and then this will be your output, a couple others. This assembly, this will be for your, I guess it's like an oil cooler, oil to water cooler, water pump, and then your output snout, that's all that stuff. And this would be your valve cover gasket. So I've got enough to wrap it all up, and that's my plan. Well, here we are with the completed product. Everything turned out beautifully. This whole front assembly went on nice and good. I gotta tighten this down. That's one thing I've forgotten. I gotta go ahead and put the exhaust manifold on, the starter on, and all the wiring assembly, but I'll go ahead and do that off camera. And then the next process will be putting it in the ski and getting it running for the first time. So there's a lot of things that I have to learn in order to get this thing to, you know, not ruin itself. I need to check for oil pressure, need to make sure it's flowing coolant and all that stuff. But there's multiple videos on that online, so I'm not even gonna cover that. This is basically just covering the engine build itself. So hope y'all enjoy watching. It's going to be kind of a long video, but other than that, make sure you give the video a thumbs up, because I spent a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money shooting it and a whole lot of money in parts. So if you ain't subscribed, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I'm on my journey to reach 100,000 subscribers, so hit that subscribe button. Thank y'all for watching. Have a good one.